Charlie Morrison had 93 days until execution. He escaped, pulled a gun on a woman in Harlem. She smiled and said, "You just made a terrible mistake." That woman was Bumpy Johnson's wife. Within hours, 300 people stood silent in the street as Bumpy walked through with a straight razor. What did Bumpy do in front of 300 witnesses that made Charlie's last 93 days pure hell? To understand how it all led here, we go back to where it truly began. Charlie Cross Morrison had exactly 93 days left to live. The state of Georgia had already decided that. Judge Harold Pemberton had signed the death warrant on August 23, 1951. Execution scheduled for May 15, 1952 at 1 minute past midnight. Death by electrocution at Reedsville State Prison. 2,000 volts through the body until the heart stopped beating and the brain stopped thinking, and Charlie Morrison stopped being a problem for the state of Georgia. 93 days. That's what Charlie had left when he woke up on February 11, 1952, in an abandoned warehouse in Lower Manhattan, shivering from alcohol withdrawal and fear and the bone-deep cold of a New York winter morning. But today, this morning, at exactly 10:23, Charlie Morrison was going to make a decision that would make those 93 days feel like an eternity. He didn't know it yet. Didn't know that in 4 hours and 17 minutes, he'd be staring down the barrel of something far worse than George's electric chair. Didn't know that the woman he was about to threaten would smile at him instead of scream. Didn't know that her smile was the most terrifying thing he'd ever see in his short, violent life. All Charlie knew right now, standing in the freezing darkness of that warehouse at 5 in the morning, was that he needed money, and he needed it fast. The image flashed through his mind again. The same image that had been haunting him for 6 days straight. A gun, a woman's face, and that smile, that impossible, inexplicable smile that said, "You just made the worst mistake of your life." But that hadn't happened yet. That was still 5 hours away. First, their blood. Charlie had killed 3 people in his life. The first was State Trooper Daniel Richardson outside Valdosta, Georgia, on a hot August night in 1951. Charlie had been running moonshine, got pulled over on a back road, panicked when Richardson reached for his radio, and put 2 bullets in the trooper's chest before his brain caught up with his trigger finger. They caught Charlie 3 days later hiding in his cousin's barn. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Death by electric chair, 93 days from now. The second person Charlie killed was Tommy Vickers, a fellow inmate at Georgia State Prison. Tommy had made the mistake of calling Charlie a coward Klansman during yard time. Charlie made the mistake of caring what Tommy thought. Sharpened toothbrush to the neck. Tommy bled out in the prison infirmary while Charlie got 6 months added to his sentence and transferred to maximum security. Not that it mattered. Dead man walking either way. The third person Charlie killed was Harold Simmons, age 63, owner of a general store outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was 4 days ago, February 7th, late afternoon. Charlie had been on the run for 2 days at that point. Escaped during a prison transfer when another inmate started a fight that gave Charlie exactly 11 seconds to jump from the moving bus and disappear into the Georgia pine forest. He'd made it all the way to Pennsylvania by riding freight trains and hitching rides and walking through forests in stolen clothes with stolen money and a stolen gun he'd taken from an Army surplus store in Richmond, Virginia. Harold Simmons had been closing up his store when Charlie walked in. Old man, kind face, probably had grandchildren. Charlie asked for all the cash in the register. Harold reached under the counter. Charlie thought it was a gun. It wasn't. It was a baseball bat. But Charlie's finger was already squeezing the trigger by the time his brain registered that Harold Simmons was just a scared old man trying to protect his life's work. The bullet caught Harold in the shoulder. Not a kill shot. but Harold fell, hit his head on the corner of the counter, and didn't get back up. Charlie took $247 from the register and ran. He found out 3 days later from a newspaper he stole from a subway station that Harold Simmons died in the hospital from a brain hemorrhage. So that made three bodies, 3 mistakes, 3 reasons why Charlie Morrison's 93 remaining days were going to be spent running until Georgia caught up with him or until something worse did. The nightmare started on day 3 of his escape. Not about the people he'd killed. Charlie had made peace with that. Clan meetings had taught him how to separate people into categories. Some people mattered. Some people didn't. State Trooper Richardson. Wrong place. Wrong time. Tommy Vickers. Disrespectful. Harold Simmons. Collateral damage. No, the nightmares weren't about guilt. They were about the chair. Every night when Charlie closed his eyes, he saw it. Reedsville's electric chair. Old Sparky. The inmates called it. Wooden chair. Leather straps. Metal cap that fit over your skull with a wet sponge underneath to conduct the electricity better. The warden had described it during Charlie's intake processing. Making sure every death row inmate knew exactly what was waiting for them. 2,000 volts, the warden had said, voice flat and professional. First jolt stops the heart. Second jolt makes sure the brain's done. Whole thing takes about 3 minutes from start to finish. You'll smell yourself burning. That's normal. You might soil yourself. That's normal too. But it's quick. Quicker than hanging. More humane than the gas chamber. You'll be gone before you know it. Except Charlie did know it. Knew it every night in his cell. Knew it every morning when he woke up. Knew it with every breath he took that brought him one breath closer to that chair. The alcohol helped. Charlie had started drinking heavy in prison, trading cigarettes and favors for homemade prison wine that tasted like paint thinner and burned going down but made the nightmares fuzzy enough to sleep through. But he'd been 6 days without a drink. 6 days of running and hiding and stealing. 6 days of his hands shaking and his stomach cramping and his brain conjuring up visions of electric chairs and crackling voltage and the smell of his own flesh cooking. He needed alcohol. He needed food. He needed sleep. But most of all, he needed money. That's what brought Charlie Morrison to New York City on February 10th, stumbling off a freight train at Penn Station at 9 at night, filthy and exhausted and desperate. He'd heard that New York was big enough to disappear in, big enough that George's death warrant couldn't reach him, big enough to hide until he could scrape together enough cash for a bus ticket to Canada, Montreal, Toronto, someplace where American law couldn't touch him, someplace where he could start over with a new name and a new life and forget that Charlie Morrison ever existed. He just needed $500, maybe $700 to be safe, enough for the ticket, enough for a few weeks of cheap hotels while he got his bearings, enough to become somebody else. Charlie spent his first night in New York sleeping in a subway station, huddled in a corner with his stolen army jacket pulled tight against the cold. He woke up at 4 in the morning, shivering and sick, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold them steady. Alcohol withdrawal. Getting worse. He stumbled out of the subway station at 5 in the morning, February 11th, into a New York City that was just starting to wake up, streetlights still on, sky still dark. Buildings so tall they blocked out what little light the pre-dawn offered. Charlie didn't know New York, didn't know the neighborhoods or the street names or which areas were safe and which weren't. He just walked. North, he thought, or maybe east. The streets all looked the same in the darkness. Cold, empty, foreign. That's when he got lost. Charlie had been trying to find Midtown. He'd heard there were hotels there. Maybe a pawn shop he could rob. Someplace with enough cash to get him to Canada. But the subway system made no sense. Too many lines. Too many stops. Maps that looked like tangled spider webs. He got off at 125th Street because the name sounded important. Figured a street with a number that high must be significant, must be central. He walked up the stairs from the subway platform and stepped into Harlem. The first thing Charlie noticed was that every face he saw was black. Every single one. The man sweeping the sidewalk outside a barber shop. The woman unlocking the gate in front of a grocery store. The group of young men standing on a corner, smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices. The old woman walking past with a Bible tucked under her arm, heading to early morning church service. Black. All of them. Charlie's racist brain, corrupted by 9 years of Klan meetings and cross burnings and speeches about racial purity, immediately told him to get out. This was enemy territory. This was dangerous. These people were different, were lesser, were a threat, but Charlie was also desperate. And desperation makes people stupid. He saw the dress shop just as the sky started to lighten. 6 in the morning. February sunrise coming slow and cold. The shop was on Lenox Avenue, sandwiched between a barber shop and a small restaurant that wasn't open yet. The storefront looked prosperous, well-maintained, expensive dresses in the window display, gold lettering on the glass that read, "Mayme's Fine Dresses, Est, 1948. Charlie stood across the street and watched. A black woman's dress shop in a black neighborhood. Charlie's Klan-poisoned thinking told him this would be easy. Woman alone. Probably wouldn't fight back. Probably kept cash in the register. Get in, get the money, get out. Simple. He waited. Watched. 6 in the morning became 7. 7 became 8. The street started waking up. More people walking past. Shop owners opening their businesses. A different rhythm than the parts of New York Charlie had seen. Slower. More community-oriented. People greeting each other. Stopping to talk. And something strange started happening. People kept walking past the dress shop. Nothing unusual about that. Except they'd slow down, glance at the windows, look at the door, then keep walking. At first, Charlie thought he was imagining it, but it kept happening. A man in a butcher's apron walked past, slowed, looked, kept going. A young woman with a baby carriage did the same thing. An old man in a church suit, a teenage boy. They weren't looking at the dresses in the window. They were looking at the shop itself, checking on it, making sure it was still there, still locked, still safe. Charlie didn't understand what he was seeing, didn't understand that in Harlem. Mayme's dress shop was more than just a business. It was a landmark, a symbol, and the woman who owned it was protected by more than just locks and alarms. At 9:45 in the morning, a woman approached the shop from the south. She was well-dressed, early 40s, maybe. Long coat, nice hat, heels that clicked on the sidewalk. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who owned something valuable and knew it. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and turned on the lights. Charlie watched from across the street, waited 15 more minutes. No one else went inside. No assistant. No customers. No early morning deliveries. Just the woman. Alone. Charlie's hand went to his pocket, felt the weight of the stolen Colt M1911 pistol. Army surplus. Old. Poorly maintained. But it looked mean, and that was all that mattered. He crossed the street at 10:20 in the morning. The sun was fully up now. People on the sidewalks. Cars driving past. Normal Tuesday morning in Harlem. Charlie reached for the door handle, pulled it open. A small bell above the door chimed. He stepped inside. The shop was warm, clean, smelled like fabric and perfume. Dresses on racks along both walls. A counter at the back with a cash register. A door behind the counter that probably led to a back room. And the woman, standing near the counter, looking at a ledger, making notes with a fountain pen. She looked up when Charlie walked in. Her eyes took him in. The stolen army jacket, the dirty clothes underneath, the unshaven face, the desperate, wild look of a man who'd been running for too long. And she didn't scream, didn't run, didn't show any fear at all. She just looked at him with an expression Charlie couldn't quite read. Charlie's hand went into his jacket, pulled out the gun, pointed it at the woman's face. "Empty the register," Charlie said. His voice came out rough, shaky. "Right now. Don't make me ask twice." The woman looked at the gun, looked at Charlie's face, and then she did something that made Charlie's blood run cold. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a scared smile. Something else, something that looked almost like pity. "You're not from here, are you?" the woman said. Her voice was calm, steady, like she was commenting on the weather. "I said empty the register." Charlie's voice cracked. The gun trembled in his hand. He was used to people being afraid. The gun usually made people scared. This woman was looking at him like he was a child throwing a tantrum. "I heard you," the woman said. She still hadn't moved toward the register. "I'm just trying to understand something. You're lost, aren't you? You don't know where you are. I know exactly where." "You're in Harlem," the woman interrupted. Her voice didn't change, didn't get louder or softer, just factual. "On Lenox Avenue, and you walked into my shop. You pulled a gun on me." She paused, tilted her head slightly. "Do you know who I am?" Charlie didn't, and that ignorance was about to cost him everything. "I don't care who you are," Charlie said, stepping closer, raising the gun higher. "You're about to be a—" "My name is Mayme Johnson," the woman said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" It didn't. Charlie had been in prison for months before his escape. Before that, he'd been running moonshine in Georgia and Alabama. He didn't know Harlem, didn't know the names that mattered here, didn't understand what this woman was trying to tell him. "I don't care what your name is," Charlie said. "Get the money, now, or I swear to God I'll—" That's when Mayme said the 5 words that should have made Charlie run. "You just made a terrible mistake." Her voice didn't change, didn't get louder, didn't get threatening. She said it like she was informing him of a simple fact, like telling someone they'd stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. Unfortunate, but not her problem to solve. Charlie laughed, nervous laughter that didn't sound confident even to his own ears. "Yeah, what kind of mistake?" Mayme looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that made Charlie's confusion spike into genuine alarm. She walked past him, not running, not trying to escape, just walked calmly, like she owned the place and Charlie was just a minor inconvenience. She walked to the front of the shop, reached up and turned the open sign to closed. Then she locked the front door, drew the shade down over the window, blocking the view from the street. "What are you doing?" Charlie demanded, spinning to keep the gun trained on her. "Buying you time," Mayme said simply. "A few hours, at least. After that." She walked past Charlie again, moved behind the counter to where a telephone sat next to the cash register. "Don't," Charlie started, but Mayme was already picking up the receiver, already dialing. Charlie could have stopped her, should have stopped her. But he was too confused by her behavior, too thrown off by her absolute lack of fear, to react quickly enough. The phone rang twice. Someone picked up. "It's me," Mayme said quietly into the receiver. Her eyes never left Charlie's face. "I need you to tell him that the roses need watering. The shop closed early today." A pause. Someone speaking on the other end. "Yes," Mayme said. "Right away." She hung up, turned back to Charlie, who was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "What the hell was that?" Charlie demanded. "Who did you just call?" "Small's Paradise," Mayme said. "That's a nightclub about 6 blocks from here. I left a message for my husband. Something cold twisted in Charlie's stomach. Your husband? Ellsworth Johnson, Mayme said, watching Charlie's face carefully. Though most people call him Bumpy, the name didn't register with Charlie. He had no idea who Bumpy Johnson was. No idea that he'd just taken hostage the wife of the most dangerous man in Harlem. No idea that in neighborhoods from 110th Street to 155th Street, from the East River to the Hudson, there were exactly 3 rules everyone knew. Rule 1, don't steal from Bumpy's people. Rule 2, don't disrespect Bumpy's territory. Rule 3, don't ever touch Bumpy's wife. Charlie Morrison had just broken Rule 3. I don't care who your husband is, Charlie said, trying to sound tough, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers like water. He shows up here, I'll shoot him too. Now get the money. Or what? Mayme interrupted. You'll shoot me. Then what do you think you're walking out of this shop alive after that? You think Harlem will let you? Charlie grabbed her arm. Hard enough to bruise. Listen, lady, I've killed before. I'll do it again. Your husband, whoever he is, he's just another. The sound of sirens interrupted him. Charlie's head snapped toward the front of the shop. Through a gap in the shade, he could see police cars pulling up outside. 3 cars, 6 cops climbing out, drawing weapons, taking positions. You called the cops. Charlie's voice rose with panic. His grip on Mayme's arm tightened. No, Mayme said simply. But someone saw you walk in here with a gun. Harlem looks out for its own. Charlie dragged Mayme to the front window, pressed the gun against her head, shouted through the door. I've got a hostage. You try to come in here, I'll kill her. Outside, the police took defensive positions. A negotiator started talking through the locked door, but that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what was happening on Lenox Avenue. People were gathering, not running away, not fleeing the scene of a hostage situation. Gathering, coming closer and standing in the street between the police cars and the shop. 50 people, then 100, then more. And they weren't panicking. They weren't screaming or crying or demanding action. They were just standing there, watching, waiting. Mayme walked to the back of the shop, opened a drawer behind the counter, and pulled out a newspaper. Old, maybe a few weeks old. She walked back to where Charlie stood by the window, still holding the gun, still trying to understand what was happening outside. She laid the newspaper on the counter in front of him. The headline read, Bumpy Johnson, the man nobody dares touch. There was a photograph, a man in a suit, not particularly tall, not particularly imposing in the photograph, but something about his eyes, something cold, something final. That's my husband, Mayme said quietly. In about 4 hours, he'll be here, so you've got a choice to make. She pushed the newspaper closer to Charlie. You can wait for him, or you can run. But Charlie, she knew his name. The police must have told her through the door during the initial negotiation. If you're still here when he arrives, that gun in your hand won't save you. Those police outside won't save you. And those 93 days you have left until Georgia executes you. Mayme's eyes met his. They're going to feel like an eternity. The first hour passed like a slow drowning. 11 in the morning. Charlie had been holding Mayme hostage for 47 minutes. The police had established a perimeter outside. 3 patrol cars had become 5. Officers crouched behind open doors, weapons drawn but not aimed. A negotiator kept talking through the locked door, his voice calm and professional, asking Charlie what he needed, what he wanted, how they could resolve this peacefully. But something was wrong. The police weren't moving, weren't advancing, weren't doing any of the things Charlie expected them to do in a hostage situation. They just held their positions, waiting, like they knew something Charlie didn't. And the people. The people kept coming. At first it was just curious onlookers, normal for a police situation. People slowing down to see what was happening. A few stopping on the sidewalk. Nothing unusual. But then they didn't leave. A woman in a cleaning uniform stopped across the street, looked at the shop, looked at the police. Didn't move. Just stood there. A man in a butcher's apron came out of his shop 3 doors down. Wiped his hands on his apron. Walked closer. Stopped at the edge of the police line. Stood still. An old man with a cane, a young mother with a baby, 2 teenage boys who should have been in school. A priest in black robes. 1 by 1, 2 by 2, they came and they stayed. By 11:30, there were maybe 50 people on Lenox Avenue, not shouting, not demanding action, not doing anything except standing in absolute silence, watching Mayme's dress shop like they were waiting for something to begin. Charlie pressed his face against the gap in the window shade, tried to understand what he was seeing. "Why aren't they leaving?" he asked, more to himself than to Mayme. Mayme sat in a chair behind the counter, hands folded in her lap, looking more like a woman waiting for a dentist appointment than a hostage in an armed standoff. "Because this is Harlem," she said quietly. "And you touch something that doesn't belong to you." The crowd kept growing. That's what made Charlie's hands start shaking worse than the alcohol withdrawal already made them shake. The crowd kept growing and nobody was trying to stop it. Noon came. The sun was high now, warming the February cold, just enough to make standing outside bearable. And there were easily 150 people filling the street. Maybe more. Charlie couldn't count them all. They packed the sidewalks, spilled into the road, forced cars to detour around them. A police sergeant tried to move them back. Charlie could hear him through the door, voice raised and commanding. "Folks, you need to clear this street. This is an active hostage situation. You're interfering with police operations. I'm ordering you to disperse." Nobody moved. "Ma'am, sir, I need you to step back. This is a direct order." Nothing. Not a word. Not a step. The crowd stood like statues, eyes fixed on the dress shop. "If you don't comply, we will be forced to make arrests." An elderly woman near the front, maybe 80 years old, wearing a church hat and carrying a Bible, looked at the sergeant like he was simple. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying across the silent street, "we're not interfering. We're witnessing." The sergeant opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the crowd, looked at his fellow officers, made a calculation that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with reality. You couldn't arrest 150 people, couldn't physically move them without starting a riot. And clearly, something else was happening here that the NYPD didn't fully understand. Charlie watched through the window, his stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. "What do they want?" he asked Mayme. "To see how this ends," Mayme said. She hadn't moved from her chair, hadn't shown an ounce of fear or distress. "To make sure I'm safe. To bear witness." "Witness to what?" "To what happens when someone breaks the rules." 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Charlie had been inside the dress shop for nearly 3 hours. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His head pounded from withdrawal and stress and the crushing weight of a situation spiraling completely out of his control. The crowd had swelled to something Charlie couldn't comprehend. 300 people. Maybe more. They filled Lenox Avenue from sidewalk to sidewalk. Old men in suits. Young women in work dresses. Children held on their parents' hips. Store owners who'd closed their businesses to be here. Factory workers still in their coveralls. Church ladies in their finest hats. 300 people of every age, every occupation, every walk of Harlem life. and they all stood in complete silence. No one was shouting. No one was chanting. No one was making demands or threats. They just stood, watching, waiting, their collective presence so heavy and oppressive that Charlie felt it through the walls like physical pressure. A police captain had arrived. Henderson. Someone called him. Older than the other cops. More stripes on his uniform. He stood near the front of the crowd, looking at the mass of people, looking at the dress shop, looking like a man doing math in his head and not liking the answer he was getting. More police cars arrived. 8 total now. Maybe 16 officers, all armed, all positioned, all completely useless against 300 people who refused to move and refused to break any law that would justify force. Then something happened that made Charlie's blood run cold. An old woman, had to be 85 if she was a day, walked up to the police line. She carried a folding chair, set it down right in the middle of the street, sat down in it, opened a thermos and poured herself a cup of coffee. "Ma'am," an officer said, approaching her carefully, "you can't sit there. This is a police operation." The old woman sipped her coffee. "I'll be here until Mrs. Johnson is safe, officer, however long that takes." "Ma'am, please." "I've known Mayme Johnson for 20 years, the old woman said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "I was at her wedding. She comes to my church every Sunday. That girl in there is family, and family doesn't leave family alone when they're in trouble." The officer looked at Henderson. Henderson shook his head. "Let it go. Pick your battles." 10 minutes later, a man in a baker's uniform came out of his shop carrying a tray of rolls. He walked through the crowd, handing them out. "Free. For anyone who wanted one. It's going to be a long wait," he said to no one in particular. "Might as well eat." People took the rolls, said thank you, kept standing, kept watching. Charlie felt something breaking inside him. This wasn't a crowd. This was something else. Something organized without organization. Something unified without leadership. 300 people acting as one. And none of them had to say a word to know what they were doing or why. "You see them, Charlie." Mamie's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. He turned to look at her. She'd stood up from her chair, walked to the window, stood beside him, looking out at the ocean of faces. 300 people, Mayme said softly. "They didn't come to save me. They came to witness. To see what happens, to remember, and then to tell the story." Charlie's mouth was dry. "Story about what?" "About you," Mayme said. She turned to face him. "About the man who didn't know where he was, who walked into Harlem thinking he could take what he wanted, who put a gun to the wrong woman's head." She gestured toward the crowd. "They'll tell your story for 100 years, Charlie, but it won't be the story you want told." That's when Charlie made a mistake. He asked the question he shouldn't have asked. "Why do they care so much about you?" Mayme smiled, sad, almost pitying. "It's not about me. It's about what I represent. My husband built something here, something bigger than numbers running or protection rackets or any of the business he does. He built trust. He built respect. He built a community that knows if you touch one of us, you touch all of us." She walked back to the counter, sat down, folded her hands. "Let me tell you 3 stories, Charlie. 3 stories about what happens when people forget that." Charlie didn't want to hear them, but he couldn't stop listening. 2 years ago, Mayme said, her voice taking on the quality of someone reciting facts that everyone already knew. "A man came into this shop. White man, drunk, bumped into me on his way out, spilled my coffee. I said, 'Excuse me anyway.' Polite, professional." She paused. He turned around and called me a name I won't repeat. Then he put his hand on my shoulder. Pushed me. Not hard. Just disrespectful. Establishing dominance. I think he thought, "What happened to him?" Charlie asked, already knowing he didn't want to know. They found him 3 days later in an alley off 132nd Street. Alive. Conscious. But his right hand was missing 3 fingers. Clean cuts. Surgical. Almost. And he never said a word about who did it or why. Just packed his things and left New York that same week. Charlie felt his stomach turn. 6 months ago, Mayme continued, someone stole a dress from this shop. Just walked in, grabbed one off the rack, and ran out before I could stop him. Young kid. Maybe 17. Probably needed money. And they pulled him out of the Harlem River 2 weeks later. Alive. Breathing. Physically unharmed, except for being wet and cold. But he hasn't spoken a word since. Not one word. Just sits in his mother's house, staring at walls. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with him. He just won't talk. The third story came out quieter. Darker. Last year, the police tried to arrest my husband, brought 6 squad cars, 12 officers, had a warrant, everything legal and proper. They showed up at Small's Paradise at midnight, thinking they'd catch him off guard. Mayme's eyes met Charlie's. Within 20 minutes, 300 people surrounded the police station. Didn't break any windows. Didn't throw any rocks. Didn't threaten anyone. They just stood there, silent, all night long. 300 people standing in the February cold, watching the police station. Waiting. What happened? By morning, the warrant disappeared. The charges were dropped. My husband walked out the front door, and those 300 people went home. No violence, no arrests, just presence. Just the message that said, "You can't touch him. We won't let you." Charlie's legs felt weak. He slid down the wall, sat on the floor, the gun still in his hand but pointed at nothing. "That's real power, Charlie," Mayme said, her voice soft but cutting like a blade. "Not the gun in your hand. Not the violence you've done. Real power is the ability to make 300 people leave their jobs, skip their lunch, stand in the cold, and wait. Just wait. Because they know something you don't." "What?" Charlie's voice came out as a whisper. "That justice here doesn't come from badges or courtrooms. It comes from community, from loyalty, from the understanding that we protect our own. And if you threaten that, you face all of us." Charlie looked out the window again, counted the faces, lost count, started over, lost count again. 300 people, maybe more, standing in perfect silence, like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict, like witnesses at an execution, like a congregation waiting for a sermon they'd heard before but needed to hear again. "They're not here to save you," Charlie said, the realization hitting him like cold water. "No," Mayme agreed. "They're here to watch you learn." The afternoon crawled forward. Time moved like cold molasses. Charlie's brain kept trying to find a way out. Rush the door, use Mayme as a shield, fire shots in the air to scatter the crowd, take his chances in the chaos. But every plan dissolved when he looked at those 300 faces. Calm, patient, immovable. Henderson tried one more time to disperse them. Used a megaphone this time, voice amplified and official. "This is Captain William Henderson of the NYPD. You are ordered to clear this street immediately. You are interfering with an ongoing police operation. Failure to comply will result in arrests." The crowd didn't even acknowledge he'd spoken. Henderson lowered the megaphone, rubbed his face with his free hand, turned to his sergeants. "We can't move them," Charlie heard him say through the door. "We arrest one. The others won't budge. We use force. We start a riot. And then we've got a hostage situation and a riot. What do we do? Captain. Henderson looked at the dress shop, looked at the crowd, made a decision. We wait, because that's what you did in Harlem when Bumpy Johnson's wife was in danger. You waited. You let the neighborhood handle its own business in its own way. You remembered that some things were bigger than procedure, bigger than protocol. You remembered that in this neighborhood, there were rules that existed long before the NYPD, and those rules were enforced by people who didn't need badges or guns. They just needed 300 witnesses and the certainty that justice would be served. 2:30 in the afternoon. Charlie heard it before he saw it. A change in the quality of silence, a shift in the air, something moving through the crowd like wind through wheat. He pressed his face to the window gap, looked south down Lenox Avenue. The crowd was turning. All of them. Slowly. 300 faces rotating toward the same direction like sunflowers following the sun. And then Charlie saw him. At the far end of the street, 6 blocks away but unmistakable, a man in a gray suit, walking, not hurrying, not running, just walking with the steady, inevitable pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going and knew nothing would stop him from getting there. Bumpy Johnson. The crowd didn't part immediately. They waited, watched him approach, and as he got closer, they began to move, not scrambling, not rushing, just stepping aside, creating a path down the center of Lenox Avenue. 300 people splitting like the Red Sea, silent and precise, making way for the king to enter his kingdom. Bumpy walked through the corridor of bodies. His shoes clicked on the pavement. That was the only sound. Click, click, click. 300 people holding their breath. Police officers frozen in position. The whole world narrowed down to one man in a gray suit walking toward a dress shop. He wore the suit like armor, perfectly tailored, crisp white shirt, thin black tie, fedora tilted just slightly, shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a businessman heading to a meeting, like a banker going to lunch, like anything except what he was. But Charlie saw it, in the way Bumpy moved, in the way he held himself, in his eyes. This was a man who'd killed before, who'd killed often, who'd done things that made killing just another Tuesday afternoon task, no more significant than buying groceries or reading the newspaper. And he was here for Charlie. Bumpy stopped 10 feet from the shop door. The crowd closed in behind him. 300 people forming a wall at his back. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present, just there, just saying without words. We stand with him. We witness with him. We are him, and he is us. Bumpy didn't look at the shop. Not yet. He looked at Captain Henderson. "Captain," Bumpy said. His voice was quiet, conversational, but in the absolute silence of Lenox Avenue. Every word carried like it was spoken through a microphone. "I'm going to give you some advice." Henderson's jaw tightened. "Mr. Johnson." "In about 30 seconds, Bumpy continued, speaking over Henderson like he wasn't interrupting, just stating facts. "I'm going through that door. What happens after that? You don't want your officers to witness. You don't want them writing reports about what they saw. You don't want them testifying in court about what occurred. This is a police matter," Henderson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is a Harlem matter," Bumpy corrected gently. "You can have your men here when it happens, and they'll spend the next year dealing with paperwork and investigations. Or you can be smart. Keep them at a distance. Give me 30 seconds. And when I'm done, Morrison comes out alive and ready to go back to Georgia. Everybody wins." "Johnson, if I let you..." "You're not letting me do anything," Bumpy said. His eyes locked onto Henderson's. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can have your officers close enough to see clearly, or you can position them far enough away that what they hear is questionable. Your choice. Henderson looked at the crowd. 300 witnesses, 300 people who'd tell whatever story needed to be told. 300 alibis for whatever Bumpy Johnson was about to do. He made the same calculation he'd been making for 15 years. The same calculation every cop in Harlem eventually made. Fight the system and lose everything. Or work within the system and keep your job, your sanity, your life. Officers, Henderson called out, voice tight. Fall back to the end of the block. Maintain visual on the building, but do not approach unless I give the order. Captain, we can't just... That's an order. The police retreated. Not completely gone, but far enough. Far enough that they couldn't see clearly through the shop's windows. Far enough that they could later claim they didn't witness what happened next. The crowd didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were. 300 people who'd come to see this. Who'd waited hours for this. Who would remember this for the rest of their lives and tell their children and grandchildren about the day they saw justice served on Lenox Avenue. Bumpy reached into his jacket. Every cop in the distance tensed. Hands moved toward guns. Bumpy didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a straight razor, the old-fashioned kind, the kind barbers used, the kind that could shave a man's face smooth or open his throat from ear to ear depending on the angle and pressure and intent. He opened the razor with a practiced flick of his wrist. Click. That sound carried across the silent street. Metal on metal. Sharp. Final. The sound of a promise about to be kept. Bumpy looked at the shop door. Then he looked at Henderson one more time. 30 seconds. Captain, that's all I need. And these 300 people are my witnesses. When I walk out of there, it'll be because I defended my wife from an armed assailant. Self-defense. Clean and simple. He turned toward the door, walked those last 10 feet, stood in front of the locked entrance, and instead of kicking it in, instead of breaking it down, Bumpy knocked. 3 times. Polite, almost friendly. Mr. Morrison, Bumpy called out. His voice was loud enough for Charlie to hear, loud enough for the crowd to hear, loud enough for the police in the distance to hear. I'm giving you one chance, one opportunity to make this easy on yourself. Charlie's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the gun. He grabbed Mayme, pressed the barrel against her temple, shouted toward the door. Stay back, I'll kill her. I swear I'll... Open this door, Bumpy continued, speaking over Charlie's panic like it was just noise, just static, just irrelevant sound. Let my wife walk out. You do that. Captain Henderson arrests you. You go back to Georgia. They execute you quick. You don't suffer. That's option 1. Silence. Charlie's breathing was ragged. The gun trembled against Mayme's head. Option 2, Bumpy said, his voice dropping lower, colder. I come in myself, and before you go back to Georgia, you spend a few days in a hospital wishing you'd chosen option 1. Those are your choices. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to count to 3. Then I'm coming in regardless of your answer. You can't... Charlie started. 1. I'll kill her, I'll... 2. Charlie looked at Mayme. Her eyes were calm, resigned, like she'd seen this before, like she knew how it ended. Charlie, she said softly, put the gun down, please. 3. Bumpy didn't kick the door, didn't break it down. He tried the handle, still locked. He stepped back, looked at it. Then he kicked it once, hard, right beside the lock mechanism. The door exploded inward, wood splintering, lock tearing free from the frame. The door swung open and bounced off the interior wall. Bumpy stepped inside. The straight razor was open in his hand, glinting in the afternoon light streaming through the window. Charlie spun toward him. pulled Mayme in front of him as a shield, aimed the gun at Bumpy's chest. "Don't move or I'll—" Charlie pulled the trigger. Click. The Colt M1911 jammed. The poorly maintained, stolen Army surplus pistol that Charlie had never properly cleaned or checked failed at the worst possible moment. The slide was frozen halfway back. A spent cartridge stuck in the ejection port. Charlie stared at the useless gun in his hand for one frozen second. That second cost him everything. Bumpy closed the distance in 2 steps. His left hand shot out, grabbed Charlie's wrist, twisted with brutal efficiency until Charlie screamed, and the jammed pistol clattered to the floor. His right hand, the one holding the razor, came up in one smooth, practiced motion. And then came the lesson. Bumpy pushed Charlie back against the wall, held him there with one hand. The razor came up. Charlie saw it coming, saw the light reflecting off the blade, saw his death approaching in the form of sharpened steel. But Bumpy didn't cut deep, didn't go for the throat, didn't kill. The razor opened a precise line across Charlie's neck, about 2 inches below his chin, from the left side of his jaw to the right, deep enough to bleed heavily, deep enough to hurt like hell, deep enough to scar permanently. But not deep enough to kill. The cut took maybe 2 seconds. Surgical precision, professional. Like Bumpy had done this before, like he knew exactly how deep to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly where to stop. "That's for putting your hands on my wife," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was calm, professional, like he was explaining something to a particularly slow student. Charlie clutched his throat. Blood poured between his fingers, hot, sticky. He could feel his pulse hammering against his palms as he tried to stop the bleeding. Bumpy stepped back, wiped the razor blade on Charlie's stolen jacket, closed it with a practiced flick, slipped it back into his pocket. Then he turned to Mayme. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Bumpy nodded, turned back to Charlie, who'd slid down the wall into a sitting position, both hands pressed against his throat, eyes locked on Bumpy's face with the desperate focus of an animal caught in a trap. "Mr. Morrison," Bumpy said, crouching down, eye level with Charlie now. "You came to Harlem today thinking it would be easy. You got lost. Ended up in a neighborhood you didn't understand. Walked into a black woman's shop and figured you could take what you wanted because you had a gun, and she didn't." He paused. Let that sink in. "You thought everything your clan taught you about being superior would protect you. Thought that gun made you powerful. Thought you were untouchable." Bumpy stood, looked down at Charlie bleeding on the floor. "You were wrong about all of that. And that cut on your throat. That's your lesson. That's what you remember for however many days you've got left. You remember the day you learned that hate isn't armor, a gun isn't power, and some women have husbands who walk through police lines to protect them." Bumpy walked to the door, called out toward the street. "Captain Henderson, Morrison's ready for arrest. He needs medical attention. Cut on his throat. Not deep, but it's bleeding pretty good. He'll live long enough to get back to Georgia." Henderson appeared in the doorway, 2 officers behind him. They looked at Charlie, bleeding on the floor. Looked at Bumpy standing there, calm and collected. Looked at the jammed pistol lying in the corner. Henderson's eyes moved to a decorative letter opener on Mayme's desk, a brass piece shaped like a small dagger that Mayme kept for opening mail. "What happened here, Mr. Johnson?" "Morrison tried to attack my wife with that letter opener when I came through the door," Bumpy said, pointing. "I disarmed him. Had to defend her. Things got physical." Henderson looked at the letter opener, looked at Charlie's throat. The story was weak. Everyone in that room knew it. But Henderson was smart enough to understand what Bumpy was offering him. A story that explained the blood without requiring anyone to admit what had really happened. "I see," Henderson said slowly. "And you're certain that's what occurred?" "Absolutely certain." Henderson turned to Mayme. Mrs. Johnson, can you confirm your husband's account? Mayme didn't hesitate. That's exactly what happened. Captain, Charlie grabbed that letter opener and came at me. My husband stopped him. Thank God he arrived when he did. Henderson nodded, turned to his officers. You heard them. Morrison attacked Mrs. Johnson with a weapon. Mr. Johnson intervened in defense of his wife. Get Morrison to Harlem Hospital. Have the doctors patch him up. Then contact Georgia State Prison. They've got a death row inmate to pick up. Two officers moved forward, hauled Charlie to his feet, started dragging him toward the door. Charlie was crying now. From pain. From fear. From the crushing realization that he'd nearly died, and that only Bumpy Johnson's decision to let him live had saved him. Bumpy opened the door wide. Afternoon light flooded in, and behind that light, 300 faces looked in through the doorway. 300 people who'd stood for hours, waiting for this moment. 300 witnesses to justice served. Charlie was dragged out into that light, into the view of all those people. And the crowd didn't cheer, didn't applaud, didn't shout or celebrate. They just looked. 300 pairs of eyes, silent, judging, bearing witness. The officers dragged Charlie through the crowd. 300 people stepped aside to let them pass. Not one person said a word. Not one person touched him. They just watched. Let him see their faces. Let him understand what it meant to violate Harlem's rules. Mayme stepped out of the shop, stood in the doorway. The crowd's attention shifted to her, making sure she was unharmed, making sure she was safe. Thank you for coming, Mayme said. Her voice carried across the silent street. A voice from the crowd, an old man near the front. This is our Harlem, Mrs. Johnson. We protect what's ours. And then, without another word, the 300 people turned, began to disperse, quietly, calmly, walking back to their jobs, their homes, their lives. The show was over. The lesson had been taught. The story would be told. Not one person looked back at Charlie Morrison being loaded into an ambulance. He wasn't worth it. The ambulance took Charlie to Harlem Hospital. Doctor Samuel Green cleaned the blood away from Charlie's throat and stopped. Just stopped. Stared at the wound. Who did this? He asked quietly. Charlie didn't answer. Couldn't answer. This cut is perfect, Doctor, Green said, beginning to stitch. Same depth the entire length. No hesitation marks. Whoever made this cut knew exactly what they were doing, exactly how deep to go without hitting the carotid. 19 sutures, each one placed with careful precision. Whoever did this, Doctor, Green said as he worked, is an artist. That same evening, Captain Henderson sat in a bar nursing a whiskey. Bumpy Johnson walked in, sat down next to him, ordered whiskey, 2 glasses. They sat in silence for 5 minutes, drinking, not looking at each other. That story's not going to hold up under scrutiny, Henderson finally said. Doesn't need to, Bumpy replied. Just needs to be the official version. Henderson raised his glass. Bumpy raised his. They drank. They nodded. They went their separate ways. The next morning, Mayme's fine dresses opened at 9 o'clock sharp. Customers came in all day, not just to shop, to see, to witness, to confirm that Mrs. Johnson was safe. Good to see you, Mrs. Johnson. We're glad you're safe. Harlem takes care of its own. The newspapers ran the story that afternoon. Hostage situation ends peacefully in Harlem. 300 witnesses confirm self-defense. No journalist dared write what really happened. Everyone who worked in Harlem knew some truths don't need to be printed. Charlie Morrison returned to Georgia on February 13th, 91 days left. and a scar he saw every morning in the showers. The other inmates asked about it. Charlie told different stories. Got jumped during escape. Cut himself climbing through a window. He never told the truth. Never said. I threatened Bumpy Johnson's wife and he let me live just long enough to make it to the electric chair. But the nightmares told the truth. Every night, Charlie dreamed about 300 people standing in the street, 300 faces watching him, 300 pairs of eyes bearing witness. They didn't look at me like an enemy, Charlie told his cellmate one night. They looked at me like garbage, like I wasn't worth their anger, just worth remembering, worth using as a lesson. The days crawled past. 91 became 80. 80 became 30. On his last day, May 14th, 1952, Charlie asked for a mirror. He looked at the scar across his throat, touched it, traced the line, remembered. I didn't die on the electric chair, he whispered. I died in Harlem, in front of 300 people. At 1 minute past midnight on May 15th, Charles Cross Morrison was executed at Reedsville State Prison. He was 28 years old, as they strapped him in. Morrison kept touching the scar on his throat, over and over. 2,000 volts. 3 minutes. Dead. The scar remained visible even after death. 70 years later. People in Harlem still tell the story. Not about Bumpy Johnson and his razor. About the 300 people who stood in Lenox Avenue on a February afternoon in 1952. Who left their jobs. Who stood in the cold and waited. To bear witness. To say, this is our neighborhood. Threaten one of us. You face all of us. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. But the lesson lived on. Real power isn't how many people you can hurt. It's how many people you leave alive to remember. It's making 300 people stand in the street for hours just to prove don't touch what belongs to us. In 2024, a young man with neo-Nazi tattoos came to Harlem, stood outside what used to be Mayme's Fine Dresses, now a museum. Read the plaque. On this site, February 11th, 1952, 300 citizens stood witness to justice. He saw the photograph. 300 faces, 300 pairs of eyes. Read about Charlie Morrison, about the scar, about the lesson. Without a word, he turned around. Left Harlem. The scar from 70 years ago was still doing its work. And 300 people from 1952 were still teaching. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And in Harlem, it's enforced by communities that remember.